The stars above the planet Velshara burned cold and white, like the eyes of 1,000 judges watching from the heavens. Somewhere between those stars, a massive station floated in orbit, a ring of black metal and glowing energy shields that the galaxy knew as the Crucible of Tarak. It was not a place of science or diplomacy. It was a place where civilizations settled their differences the old way, through blood. Captain Vira Thalkeen stood at the observation deck of her dreadnought, the Ashbourne, and stared down at the station below. She was tall, even by the standards of the Velshari, nearly 8 feet of dense muscle, wrapped around a frame reinforced by natural bone plating that covered her shoulders, spine, and forearms like organic armor. 4 powerful arms hung at her sides, each one capable of bending steel. Her skin was the color of dark slate, and her eyes glowed a faint amber, the mark of a warrior born in the deep gravity zones of her homeworld. She had fought 42 times in the Crucible. She had won 42 times. Not once had an opponent lasted more than 6 minutes against her. Not once had she felt anything close to doubt. Today would be no different. Far below, on the station's diplomatic level, Ambassador Lian Zhao sat in a sterile conference room and tried to keep her hands from shaking. She was a small woman, sharp-eyed and precise, trained in the art of negotiation across 17 alien cultures. But none of her training had prepared her for this. The Velshari Dominion had blockaded New Ganymede, a human colony of 1.2 million people living on a green world at the edge of explored space. The Velshari claimed the system belonged to them, citing ancient star maps that predated human spaceflight by 10,000 years. Zhao had argued, presented counter-evidence, filed motions with the Galactic Forum, and appealed to neutral arbitrators. All of it had failed. 3 days ago, the Velshari High Council had invoked the right of Crucible. Under galactic law, any territorial dispute could be settled through single combat in the arena. The challenged party could not refuse without forfeiting their claim entirely. Humanity had to fight, and humanity had to win. Zhao had sent an urgent message back to Earth. The response had come quickly, a single ship carrying a single soldier. When she first saw him step off the transport shuttle, her heart had sunk into her stomach. Sergeant Marcus Cole was not what she had expected. He was 34 years old, average height, with the lean and compact build of a middleweight boxer. His brown hair was cut short, and his face carried the kind of calm that could be mistaken for emptiness. He wore a standard Terran Navy duty uniform with no medals, no ribbons, and no decorations of any kind. He looked like a man who had come to fix a broken pipe, not fight an alien warlord. "You're the one they sent?" Zhao had asked, unable to hide her disbelief. Marcus had looked around the station with mild curiosity, the way a tourist might look at an old building. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you understand what you're facing? The Velshari are undefeated in the Crucible. Captain Vira Thalkeen has killed 11 opponents in that arena. She's 8 feet tall and has 4 arms." Marcus had nodded slowly. "I read the briefing on the way here." "And?" He had shrugged, just a small, easy movement of his shoulders. "Sounds like a fair fight to me." That shrug had nearly driven Zhao to madness, but she had no other options. Marcus Cole was what Earth had sent, and Marcus Cole was what they had. What Zhao did not know, what almost no one outside of Earth's military command knew, was why Marcus Cole had been chosen. His file was not classified, but it was deeply uninteresting to anyone who did not know what to look for. Combat engineer, 2 tour on frontier stations, certified in zero-gravity operations, close-quarters combat, and hostile environment survival. His fitness evaluations were listed in numbers that meant nothing to alien observers, but would have made any human military doctor raise an eyebrow. Marcus Cole had spent the last 6 years training in gravity conditions that would kill most species in the galaxy. On the other side of the station, Vira reviewed the intelligence her officers had gathered on the human. She sat in her combat preparation chamber, 4 arms resting on the curved surface of a tactical display, while holographic images of Marcus rotated slowly in the air before her. She studied his frame, his movement patterns from security footage, the way he walked and carried himself. And then she laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound like stones grinding together. "This is what they send," she said to her second-in-command, a scarred Velshari named Korath. "A soft skin, a creature with 2 arms and thin bones." Korath shifted uncomfortably. "The humans have a reputation for unpredictability, Captain. Perhaps we should not." "Reputation," Vira repeated, her amber eyes narrowing with amusement. "Reputation is what the weak hide behind when they have no strength. Look at him, Korath. He is small. He is fragile. His species comes from a world of moderate gravity with no natural armor, no venom, no claws. They are prey animals who learn to build tools." She closed the display with a sweep of one hand. "This will be over before I break a sweat." That evening, the arena's administration office received 2 formal submissions. The first was from Captain Vira, specifying her preferred combat conditions: unarmed, no weapons, no time limit. The second was from Sergeant Cole, who had checked a single box on the form, no objections to opponent's terms, and had apparently gone to bed early. In his small quarters on the station's lower ring, Marcus Cole hung from a pull-up bar bolted to the ceiling. He moved slowly, deliberately, pulling himself up and lowering himself down with a rhythm that never changed. The room's environmental controls had been manually adjusted. A small readout on the wall displayed the current gravity setting inside the room. It read 3.2 G, 3.2 times the standard gravity of Earth, a level that would pin most alien species to the floor, a level that would compress the lungs and burst the blood vessels of nearly every known sentient race in the galaxy. Marcus Cole did not appear strained. He breathed evenly. His eyes were closed. He might have been sleeping. Outside his door, the station's internal sensors flagged the anomaly and sent an automatic report to the environmental monitoring system. A junior technician from the station's maintenance crew glanced at the alert, assumed it was a malfunction, and deleted it. 2 days remained before the crucible opened. Somewhere above, 500,000 spectators were already arriving, filling the station's vast amphitheater with noise and anticipation. Gambling houses across 12 star systems had set the odds at 40-1 against the human. Several species had placed bets not on whether the human would lose, but on how many seconds he would last. In the diplomatic suite, Ambassador Zhao stared out at the stars and whispered a prayer she had not said since childhood. In the combat preparation chamber, Captain Vira sharpened her mind and imagined the sound the human's bones would make when they broke. And in a small room filled with crushing gravity, Marcus Cole finished his last set, dropped from the bar, and went to sleep. The crucible was waiting. The 2 days before the fight passed slowly, like a blade being dragged across stone. The station hummed with tension. 500,000 spectators filled the crucible's massive amphitheater, and billions more watched through broadcast feeds that stretched across the galaxy. Every species with a seat at the Galactic Forum had sent observers. This was not just a fight. It was a statement. Captain Vira understood this better than anyone. On the first morning, she walked into the station's central training hall, a vast open space with transparent walls so that anyone passing through the surrounding corridors could watch. She had made sure the schedules were public. She wanted an audience. The hall was already crowded with spectators pressing against the glass when Vira began. She started with a metal beam, standard structural alloy, the kind used in starship frames. It was thick as a man's thigh and twice as long. She gripped it with her 4 hands, planted her feet, and bent it in half. The metal screamed. The crowd cheered. Next came the combat drones, 6 of them, armored and programmed to fight at the level of a trained soldier. Vira destroyed them in under 90 seconds. She moved like a storm, each of her 4 arms striking from a different angle, her bone-plated forearms deflecting the drone's attacks while her fists shattered their casings. When the last drone hit the floor in a shower of sparks, Vira stood in the center of the wreckage and looked directly at the nearest camera. She did not smile, she did not need to. The message was clear. The footage spread across the station within minutes. It reached the human delegation's quarters within the hour. Ambassador Zhao watched it 3 times, each viewing making her feel more sick. "She's doing this on purpose," Zhao said, packing the small briefing room. "She wants us to see it. She wants Marcus to see it." Commander Hale, the military liaison assigned to the delegation, nodded grimly. "Standard psychological warfare. The Velshari have been doing this for centuries. They break their opponents mentally before the fight even begins." Zhao turned to the door that led to Marcus Cole's quarters. "Has he watched any of it?" "No, ma'am. He asked the station AI to disable his news feed yesterday. He's been in his room since this morning. Training, I assume." Zhao hesitated, then knocked on the door. It opened after a moment, and Marcus stood there in a plain gray shirt, slightly damp with sweat. His quarters behind him were bare, no decorations, no personal items, just a pull-up bar and a thin sleeping mat on the floor. "Sergeant, are you aware of what Captain Vira has been doing in the training hall?" "Bending metal and smashing robots," Marcus said. "Commander Hale mentioned it." "And that doesn't concern you?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe and thought about it for a moment. "She's strong. I already knew that. Watching her prove it again doesn't change anything." Zhao studied him. There was no bravado in his voice, no false courage. He spoke the way someone might talk about the weather. She found it both reassuring and deeply unsettling. "There's something else," she said. "Our intelligence team just confirmed that Vira has filed a request to activate the arena's gravitational amplification system." Marcus raised an eyebrow. It was the most emotion she had seen from him. "The gas," Zhao continued. "It's a legal feature of the arena, rarely used but perfectly within the rules. It increases the gravity across the entire combat zone. She set it to 2.0 G, double the standard." She waited for his reaction, for the fear, the anger, the demand for a counterfiling. Instead, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. 2G, he repeated. "Marcus, at double gravity, your body weight effectively doubles. Your bones, your muscles, your heart, everything has to work twice as hard. The Velshari evolved on a high-gravity world. She's built for this. You're human," Marcus finished. "Yeah. This is serious. At 2G, most species can barely stand. She's trying to turn your own body into a prison." Marcus nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something, Ambassador?" "Of course." "Did your intelligence team pull up Earth standard combat training protocols? The ones we publish openly on the Galactic Forum's shared database?" Zhao blinked. "No, why would we?" "You should take a look. Section 12, subsection 4. Environmental conditioning requirements for all Terran combat-rated personnel." He paused. "The minimum passing standard for close quarters certification is sustained activity at 2.5 G for 45 minutes. I passed that test 6 years ago. I've been training at 3G or higher ever since." The room went very quiet. Zhao opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You train at 3G regularly?" "Every day. Earth's military figured out a long time ago that gravity is the cheapest and most effective training tool in existence. You don't need fancy equipment or genetic modification. You just need to make everything heavier and let human biology do what it does best." "Which is?" "Adapt, endure, refuse to quit." He straightened up from the doorframe. "Ambassador, she thinks she's turning up the gravity to crush me. From where I'm standing, she's just making the room feel like home." Zhao stared at him for a long time. Then she let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Is there anything you need from us?" "A good meal tonight, and maybe 8 hours of sleep." He glanced back at his bare quarters. "The food on this station is terrible, by the way. Everything tastes like wet cardboard." Despite everything, Zhao almost laughed. On the other side of the station, Vira sat with High Counselor Dreth in his private chambers. Dreth was old for a Velshari. His bone plates had dulled to a pale gray, and 2 of his 4 arms moved stiffly with age. But his mind was still sharp, and his political instincts were sharper. The gravity request has been approved, Dreth told her. 2.0 G across the full combat zone. The human delegation did not file an objection. Vyra's amber eyes gleamed. They don't understand what it means. Soft-skinned species never do. They think gravity is just a number. You are certain this is necessary. You could defeat the human without it. Of course I could, but this is not about defeating him. It is about sending a message. When the human collapses under his own weight, unable to lift his arms or draw a full breath, the galaxy will see what happens when lesser species challenge the Velshari. It will not just be a victory, it will be a lesson. Dreth nodded approvingly. Make it quick, Captain, and make it painful. Vyra rose to her full height, her forearms flexing, the bone plates along her shoulders catching the light. I will break him in 3 minutes. The gravity will do half the work for me. It will be like watching an insect drown in honey, slow, heavy, and helpless. She left the chamber with absolute confidence radiating from every step. She had planned this perfectly. The gravity would pin the human down, drain his strength, compress his lungs, and turn his muscles to lead. She had seen it happen to a dozen species before. The science was simple. The outcome was inevitable. What Captain Virathalkine did not do, what no Velshari commander had ever thought to do, was check the publicly available military records of the species they were about to fight. The files were there, sitting in the Galactic Forum's shared database, accessible to anyone with a basic search query. Training standards, environmental conditioning data, physiological adaptation studies, all of it open, all of it unclassified, and all of it completely ignored. Because who would bother researching the soft skins? The night before the fight, Marcus Cole ate a meal of rice and grilled protein in the station's mess hall, drank a cup of black coffee that he had brought from Earth, and returned to his quarters. He adjusted the gravity in his room to 3.2 G, did 300 push-ups, and fell asleep on the floor. Outside, the galaxy held its breath. Tomorrow, the crucible would open, and Vyra's carefully laid trap would close, just not around the person she expected. The arena floor was a circle of black stone, 60 meters across, polished smooth by centuries of combat. It sat at the bottom of a vast bowl carved from the station's superstructure, ringed by tier after tier of seating that rose upward like the inside of a volcano. Energy shields shimmered along the edges, transparent enough to see through, but strong enough to stop a plasma bolt. Above, floating camera drones circled like metal birds, broadcasting every angle to billions of viewers across the galaxy. 500,000 spectators filled the amphitheater. The noise was enormous, a wall of sound made up of clicks, roars, hisses, and hums from dozens of species, all blending together into something that felt less like cheering and more like the rumble of an approaching earthquake. Adjudicator Prahl stood at the center of the arena floor, his insectoid body encased in ceremonial white armor. He was a neutral official, chosen from a species that had no stake in the outcome, and his compound eyes reflected the light of 100,000 screens as he raised his four-jointed arms for silence. The noise died slowly, like a wave pulling back from the shore. "The crucible of Tarak is open," Prahl announced, his translated voice echoing from every speaker in the station. "The matter before us, territorial sovereignty of the star system designated human colony New Ganymede, the challenger, Captain Virathalkine of the Velshari Dominion, the defender, Sergeant Marcus Cole of the United Terran Navy." 2 gates opened on opposite sides of the arena. Vyra entered first. She walked like a conqueror, forearms loose at her sides, bone plates gleaming under the arena lights, every step heavy and deliberate. She wore no armor as the rules demanded, but she hardly needed it. Her natural plating covered her shoulders, forearms, shins, and the crown of her skull like sheets of living stone. Her amber eyes swept across the crowd, drinking in their adoration. The Velshari section of the amphitheater erupted in a thunderous chant, her name, repeated over and over like a war drum. Marcus entered from the opposite gate. He wore standard-issue training clothes, a fitted black shirt, flexible pants, and flat-soled boots designed for grip on smooth surfaces. He carried nothing. His expression was the same calm, almost blank look he had worn since the day he arrived. He did not wave to the crowd. He did not look up at the cameras. He walked to his starting position and stood still, hands at his sides, breathing evenly. The contrast was almost cruel. Vira towered over the arena like a monument. Marcus looked like a maintenance worker who had wandered in by accident. In the diplomatic box high above the arena floor, Ambassador Zhao gripped the railing with white knuckles. Commander Hale sat beside her, his jaw tight. Around them, representatives from a dozen species watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to open pity. A Talvari diplomat leaned toward Zhao and spoke in a translated whisper. "I am sorry, Ambassador. Your species is brave, but this will be unpleasant to watch." Zhao said nothing. Her eyes were locked on Marcus. Adjudicator Prahl raised one arm. Combat conditions are as follows: unarmed engagement. No weapons, no tools, no external assistance. No time limit. Victory is achieved by incapacitation, submission, or death. He paused. Environmental modification has been requested and approved. The gravitational amplification system will be engaged at 2.0 standard G across the full combat zone. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. In the human delegation box, several officers exchanged worried glances. The Velshari section cheered again, louder this time. "Engage gravity amplification," Prahl ordered. The change was invisible but immediate. There was no flash of light, no dramatic hum. The gas system simply increased the gravitational pull across the arena floor to twice normal. The effect, however, was visible in what it did to the two fighters. Vira adjusted her stance slightly, bending her knees a fraction. She was born on a 1.4 G world and had trained for this. The extra weight pressed down on her, but she bore it easily, her 4 legs of muscle carrying the load without complaint. She rolled her neck and cracked the joints in all 4 hands. Every camera drone pivoted to Marcus. The gravity hit him like an invisible hand pressing down on his shoulders. His knees bent, his posture compressed. For one frozen moment, it looked exactly like what Vira had predicted. A soft-skinned creature being crushed under a weight his body was never meant to carry. Then Marcus straightened up. He rolled his shoulders, stretched his neck to one side, then the other, and settled into a low, balanced stance. His feet were shoulder-width apart, his center of gravity dropped, his hands raised to chest level in a guard position that looked almost relaxed. He bounced lightly on his toes once, twice, testing the weight and finding it familiar. The murmur in the crowd changed pitch. It was subtle, but it was there, a note of confusion replacing the certainty that had been there moments before. In the Velshari command box, Koreth leaned forward. "Captain Vira, the human does not appear distressed." Vira's eyes narrowed. She had expected the human to stagger, to gasp, to fight for every breath as the gravity compressed his lungs. Instead, he stood there as if someone had merely handed him a heavy backpack. No matter. Strength in gravity was not the same as strength in combat. She would show him the difference. Prahl dropped his arm. "Begin." Vira charged. She crossed the distance between them in 3 explosive strides, her 4 arms already moving in the opening pattern of the Velshari combat form called the Storm of Hands. It was a technique designed to overwhelm, all 4 arms attacking from different angles simultaneously, creating a cage of strikes that no 2-armed opponent could hope to block. Her upper right fist drove toward Marcus's head. Her lower left swept at his ribs. Her upper left hooked toward his shoulder, and her lower right aimed for his thigh. 4 attacks, 4 angles, all arriving within a fraction of a second. Marcus did not try to block them all. He could not, she was right about that much. No 2-armed creature could match her reach and coverage. Instead, he did something that surprised her. He moved. Not backward as she expected. Sideways and forward, slipping past her upper right fist by centimeters, letting it graze his ear as he pivoted inside her reach. Her lower left caught him in the ribs, a solid hit that sent pain flaring through his side. But he was already turning, already redirecting his momentum, and her other two strikes swept through empty air. He was inside her guard now, closer than she wanted him. His left hand caught her lower right wrist and twisted, a sharp, precise movement that used her own momentum against her. His right elbow drove into the soft tissue beneath her upper left arm, just above the bone plate. The Velshari nerve cluster there lit up with pain, and for a brief instant her upper left arm went numb. Vira snarled and swung her upper right arm in a backhand that caught Marcus across the chest and sent him skidding across the stone floor. He rolled with the impact, came up on one knee, and was on his feet again before she could follow up. The crowd had gone strangely quiet. Marcus wiped a trickle of blood from his lip where he had bitten it during the hit. His ribs throbbed where her lower left had connected. He could already feel the bruise forming, deep and hot. But the pain was manageable. Pain was always manageable. That was the thing about being human that other species never seemed to understand. Not that humans did not feel pain, but that pain did not make them stop. Vira came again, faster this time, and the real fight began. For the next several minutes, the arena witnessed something that no one had expected. It was not a quick execution. It was not a one-sided beating. It was a war of adaptation, Vira's overwhelming power against Marcus's relentless efficiency. She hit him. Again and again she hit him. Her forearms found openings in his guard, struck his body, cracked his ribs, split the skin above his eye. Each blow landed with the sound of meat hitting stone, and each one should have been enough to end a lesser fighter. The crowd winced with every impact, waiting for the human to collapse. But Marcus Cole did not collapse. He took every hit, absorbed every impact, and kept moving. His style was nothing like hers. Where she was a hurricane, he was a river flowing around rocks. He slipped punches, redirected her arms using joint locks that exploited the natural rotation of her four shoulders, and targeted the same spots over and over, the nerve clusters, the gaps in her bone plating, the soft tissue under her arms where her vascular system ran close to the surface. He was not trying to overpower her, he was trying to outlast her. And slowly, so slowly that no one noticed at first, it was working. 10 minutes into the fight, Vira was breathing hard. Her forearms demanded enormous amounts of oxygen, and at 2G, every movement cost more energy than it should. She had evolved for explosive power, short, devastating bursts of violence that ended fights in seconds. She had never needed endurance, because no one had ever lasted long enough to test it. Marcus was bleeding from a cut above his eye, favoring his left side where at least 2 ribs were cracked, and moving with a slight limp from a hit he had taken to his thigh. But his breathing was steady. His eyes were focused, and every time she paused to catch her breath, he was already moving forward, pressing her, refusing to give her rest. "Why won't you fall?" Vira hissed, slamming him with a double overhead strike that drove him to one knee. Marcus spat blood onto the black stone. He looked up at her with eyes that held no anger, no desperation, only the calm, patient focus of something that had been chasing prey across open ground since before it learned to speak. "Lady," he said, rising back to his feet, "I did basic training at 3G. This is a cool breeze." For the first time in 42 fights, Captain Vira Thalkeen felt something cold settle in her chest. She did not have a word for it. Her people had forgotten the word centuries ago because they had gone so long without needing it. But Marcus Cole's people had a word for it. They called it fear. And the fight was far from over. 12 minutes had passed since the crucible opened, and the galaxy was watching something it did not understand. Every screen in every bar, embassy, warship, and living room across 100 star systems showed the same image. An 8-foot alien warrior, undefeated champion of 42 arena bouts. Breathing hard and bleeding from half a dozen small wounds, circling a battered human who refused to stay down. The betting houses had stopped taking wagers. The odds had been meaningless from the start. Nothing in the statistical models had accounted for this. On the arena floor, Vira circled Marcus and tried to understand what was happening to her. Her lungs burned. The muscles in her forearms felt heavy and slow, like they had been filled with sand. The gravity she had chosen, the weapon she had so carefully deployed, was grinding her down with every passing second. 4 arms meant 4 times the muscle mass to feed with oxygen. 4 arms meant 4 times the metabolic cost of every swing, every block, every movement. At 2G, with her heart pounding and her body screaming for rest, the math was simple and merciless. She was drowning in the weight of her own strength. Marcus was not in good shape either. His left eye was swollen nearly shut from a strike that had caught him flush on the cheekbone. At least 3 ribs on his left side were cracked, maybe broken, and every breath sent a knife of pain through his chest. His right knee ached from an impact he barely remembered. Blood from the cut above his eye had dried in a dark line down the side of his face. But his breathing was controlled. His footwork was still precise. And his eyes, the one that was still fully open, tracked Vira with the same steady patience they had shown from the first second of the fight. He was hurt, but he was not slowing down. That was the thing Vira could not accept. In her experience, damage meant decline. When she hit an opponent, they got weaker. When she broke something, the broken piece stopped working. It was simple cause and effect, the physics of combat that had governed every fight she had ever been in. But humans did not follow those rules. Somewhere in the deep history of their species, on a world of open plains and relentless sun, they had evolved a trait that the galaxy had no equivalent for. They could take damage and keep going. Not because they could not feel it, but because something in their biology, some ancient, stubborn mechanism wired into their nervous system, allowed them to push pain into the background and keep functioning. Their ancestors had chased animals across open ground for hours, running on broken toes and torn muscles, because stopping meant starvation. That legacy was written into every cell of Marcus Cole's body. Pain was information. It was not a command. Vira stopped circling. She stood still, her 4 arms hanging at her sides, her chest heaving. The amber glow of her eyes had dimmed slightly, a Velshari sign of deep exhaustion that most species would not recognize. But Marcus recognized it. He had studied her species for 3 weeks on the journey to the station, reading every publicly available paper on Velshari biology, anatomy, and combat doctrine. He knew what the dimming eyes meant. He knew she was reaching her limit. And he knew what she would do next. It came without warning. Vira's body changed. The bone plates along her shoulders and spine flushed from dark slate to deep crimson, and a visible tremor ran through her frame as her adrenal glands dumped a massive surge of combat hormones into her bloodstream. Her pupils expanded until the amber of her eyes was nearly swallowed by black. Her muscles swelled, veins standing out like cables beneath her skin. The Velshari called it the war state. It was a biological overdrive, a last resort built into their species by millions of years of evolution on a world where the predators were bigger, faster, and more numerous than the prey. In the war state, a Velshari became stronger, faster, and almost completely immune to pain. It was the ultimate weapon, the reason no species had beaten them in 200 years. It also had a cost. The war state burned through the body's energy reserves at a catastrophic rate. It could last 5 minutes, maybe 6, before the user crashed into total metabolic collapse. If Vira did not end the fight in that window, she would barely be able to stand. She was betting everything on one final assault. The crowd knew what the crimson flush meant. The Velshari section of the amphitheater erupted in a frenzy, chanting and stomping with a rhythm that shook the air. The other species leaned forward in their seats, their translators buzzing with a single word that spread through the arena like wildfire. War state, war state, war state. In the diplomatic box, Ambassador Zhao grabbed Commander Hale's arm. What is happening? What does that color mean? Hale's face was pale. It means she just stopped holding back. Vira attacked. She was faster than anything Marcus had seen from her. The exhaustion that had been dragging at her limbs vanished, replaced by explosive, terrifying speed. Her 4 arms moved in a blur, each strike carrying enough force to dent the black stone floor where it landed. She closed the distance between them in a single bound, and for the first time in the fight, Marcus could not get out of the way. Her upper arms caught him in a crushing grip, two massive hands locking around his shoulders while her lower arms wrapped around his torso. She lifted him off the ground, even at 2G, even with his effectively doubled weight, and began to squeeze. The pressure was immediate and unimaginable. Marcus felt his cracked ribs shift, grinding against each other. The air was forced from his lungs. His vision flickered at the edges, gray spots blooming like flowers in a field. He could feel her bone-plated forearms pressing into his sides, the natural armor adding a rigid, cutting edge to the compression. She was going to crush him, literally, physically crush him until his ribs gave way and his organs failed. The crowd held its breath. In the diplomatic box, Zhao pressed her hand over her mouth. On screens across the galaxy, commentators fell silent. Marcus could not breathe. He could not move his arms, they were pinned against his sides by her lower grip. His boots dangled above the arena floor. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, a white-hot pressure that filled his entire chest and radiated outward through every nerve. But his head was free. Marcus pulled his neck back as far as it would go, gathered every ounce of force his battered body could produce, and drove his forehead directly into the center of Vira's face. The human skull is one of the hardest structures in the known biological world. It is a thick, curved dome of bone, evolved over millions of years to protect the most important organ in the body. It is not a weapon that any sane species would use in combat, but humans had never been particularly sane about combat. The headbutt landed with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. Vira's central cranial plate, the thickest piece of her natural armor, absorbed most of the impact. But the shock traveled through the bone and into the soft tissue behind it, rattling her brain inside its casing. Her grip loosened by a fraction. Marcus hit her again, same spot, harder. And again. On the third strike, Vira's upper arms released. Marcus dropped, his boots hitting the stone floor with a heavy thud, and he moved on pure training muscle memory forged in years of gravity-heavy combat drills. He could not overpower her arms. He could not match her strength, but he did not need to. He needed one opening, one weak point, one piece of information that no Velshari had ever expected an opponent to know. He pivoted behind her, ducking under her wild backhand swing, and locked his right arm around the soft vascular cluster beneath her second left arm. It was a specific spot, a junction where three major blood vessels converged close to the surface, unprotected by bone plating, hidden in the gap between her arm and her torso. The Velshari anatomy texts described it in clinical detail. It was not a secret. It was simply a piece of biological trivia that no one in the galaxy had ever thought to weaponize. Marcus locked the chokehold tight. Not on her throat was armored. On the vascular junction, cutting off blood flow to the left side of her brain. Vira thrashed. Her war state still raged, and she was still unbelievably strong. Her forearms clawed at him, raking his skin, tearing his shirt, leaving deep gouges across his forearms. She spun, trying to throw him off. She slammed backward into the arena floor, driving his body into the stone with her full weight multiplied by twice the normal gravity. Marcus held on. His arms shook. His cracked ribs screamed. The impact with the floor had done something bad to his left shoulder. He could feel it grinding in a way that shoulders should not grind. His vision was a narrow tunnel of gray and red, shrinking with every heartbeat. But he held on. 15 seconds, 20, 30. The crimson flush of Vira's bone plates began to fade, bleeding back to slate gray as her war state burned through its final reserves. Her movement slowed. Her forearms stopped clawing and started pushing weakly, like someone trying to shove away a heavy blanket in their sleep. 40 seconds. She sank to her knees. Marcus went with her, maintaining the lock, his arms trembling violently now. Blood dripped from his torn forearms onto the black stone. The arena was silent, 500,000 beings holding their breath at once, the loudest silence the Crucible had ever known. 50 seconds. Captain Vira Thalkeen, undefeated champion of 42 arena bouts, terror of the Crucible, pride of the Velshari Dominion, collapsed forward onto the arena floor. Her 4 arms spread out at her sides. Her amber eyes flickered once, twice, and then closed. Marcus held the lock for 5 more seconds, making sure, feeling for the pulse beneath his arm. When he was certain she was unconscious and not dead, he released her. He tried to stand, failed, tried again, and made it to his feet on the second attempt. He swayed like a tree in a hurricane, blood running freely down both arms, his left shoulder hanging at an angle that made the medical team watching on their screens wince. Adjudicator Prahl stepped forward. He looked at the fallen Velshari captain. He looked at the barely standing human. The rules required a count, 10 seconds of incapacitation to confirm the result. He counted. The arena counted with him, 500,000 voices whispering the numbers in a dozen languages. Vira did not rise. "The Crucible is decided," Prahl announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The Defender is victorious. Sovereignty of the new Ganymede system is confirmed to the United Terran government." For 3 full seconds, there was no sound at all. Then Marcus Cole, bleeding and broken, standing in twice the gravity that should have buried him, did something that no one in the arena expected. He knelt beside Vira. He checked that she was breathing, and then he stood again and extended his hand open, palm up, waiting toward the unconscious warrior at his feet. It was not a gesture of victory. It was not a taunt. It was an offer. A human custom, older than spaceflight, older than civilization, older than language itself. The offer of help from one fighter to another, given freely without conditions. The cameras captured every detail. The image burned itself into the memory of every species watching. The battered human, standing in impossible gravity, blood dripping from his outstretched hand, offering to help the enemy who had tried to kill him. In her dimming consciousness, in the fading seconds before the darkness took her completely, Vira felt the warmth of his hand hovering near hers, and a single thought drifted through her mind like smoke. She had amplified the force to crush him. She thought she had simply adjusted the room to make him uncomfortable, like turning on the air conditioning to chill a guest. Instead, she had opened the door to Predator's home and invited it to hunt. The aftermath came in waves. The first wave was silence. A stunned, breathless silence that stretched across the Crucible station and rippled outward through broadcast feeds to every corner of the galaxy. 500,000 spectators sat motionless in their seats, staring at the arena floor where a human, broken, bleeding, and barely standing, had just done what no one had done in 200 years. The second wave was noise. It started in the human delegation box, where Commander Hale let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and Ambassador Zhao collapsed into her chair with tears streaming down her face. It spread through the neutral sections of the amphitheater, where species that had no stake in the outcome found themselves on their feet, making whatever sound their biology allowed to express shock and admiration. Even in the Velshari section, the chanting had died, replaced by a low hum of disbelief that sounded like the moan of a wounded animal. The third wave was chaos. Within 1 hour of the Crucible's conclusion, the Galactic Forum's communication networks were overloaded. Intelligence agencies from 47 different species filed emergency reports. Diplomatic channels that had been quiet for decades suddenly hummed with urgent traffic. Military advisors across the galaxy were pulled from their beds, their meals, their retirements, and asked the same question. What do we know about the humans? The answer, it turned out, was almost nothing. Not because the information was hidden. Not because humanity had cloaked its capabilities behind classification walls and encrypted databases. The opposite was true. Everything was public. Everything had always been public. Training standards, physiological data, evolutionary history, combat doctrine. All of it was sitting in the Galactic Forum's shared information database, accessible to any species with a basic data terminal. No one had ever bothered to read it. Now they read it, and what they found changed everything. The first detail that spread through the galactic intelligence community was the gravity training. Human combat personnel routinely trained at 2 to 4 times their homeworld gravity, not through genetic modification, not through cybernetic enhancement, but through simple, brutal repetition. They loaded their own bodies with weight until their bones grew denser, their tendons thickened, their hearts enlarged, and their muscles adapted to carry loads that would cripple most species. It was not a secret program. It was a basic fitness requirement, listed on page 47 of the publicly available Terran Navy Training Manual. The second detail was worse. Humans were persistence predators. Their ancestors had not evolved to be the fastest, the strongest, or the most armored creatures on their homeworld. They had evolved to chase things until those things died of exhaustion. Their cooling system, sweat, the alien analysts noted with a mix of horror and fascination, allowed them to regulate body temperature during sustained physical activity more efficiently than almost any known species. They could run for hours. They could fight for hours. They could keep going long after any reasonable biological system should have shut down, driven by a neurological override that their scientists called adrenaline and their soldiers called stubbornness. The third detail was the one that made several species quietly begin revising their military threat assessments. Humans consumed a chemical stimulant called caffeine as part of their daily morning routine, not as a combat drug, not as a medical treatment, as a casual beverage. They drank it for pleasure, often multiple times a day, in a liquid they called coffee. The biochemical profile of caffeine increased alertness, elevated heart rate, enhanced reaction time, suppressed fatigue, would have been classified as a controlled combat substance by most galactic militaries. Humans gave it to their children. The phrase that burned through the intelligence networks, repeated in 100 different languages and dialects, was simple and devastating. Do not invoke the crucible against the humans. On the station, far from the political earthquakes her victory had caused, Marcus Cole sat in a medical bay and tried not to move. The Terran medical team had done their work quickly. 3 cracked ribs were stabilized with bonding gel. His dislocated shoulder had been reset, a procedure that had involved a level of pain that made him grip the table hard enough to leave dents in the metal. The cuts on his face and arms had been closed with surgical adhesive. The swelling around his left eye had been reduced, though the bruise remained, a dark purple bloom that would take days to fade. He was wrapped in bandages and full of painkillers when the door to his medical bay opened, and a familiar figure ducked through the frame. Captain Vira Thalkeen had to turn sideways to fit through the human-sized doorway. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had just woken from a long and unpleasant sleep. Her forearms were wrapped in medical bindings of her own. The vascular cluster beneath her second left arm had suffered significant compression damage, and the rest of her body bore the marks of the war state's metabolic toll. Her bone plates had returned to their normal slate color, but they looked dull, almost fragile, like stone that had been heated and cooled too quickly. She stood in the doorway and looked at Marcus. He looked back at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus reached behind his bed and produced a bottle. It was made of dark glass, filled with amber liquid and sealed with a simple metal cap. He held it out toward her. "Whiskey," he said. "From Earth, it's a tradition. After a good fight, you share a drink." Vira stared at the bottle. Then she crossed the room in 2 slow steps, lowered herself onto a reinforced chair that groaned under her weight, and accepted the bottle with her upper right hand. She turned it over, studying the label with eyes that could not read the human script. "What is it made of?" she asked. "Grain, water, time, and a lot of patience." She opened the bottle, sniffed it, and recoiled slightly. Then, with the careful precision of a warrior approaching an unknown threat, she took a small sip. The coughing lasted nearly a minute. "Your species drinks this recreationally," she said when she could speak again, her voice rough and her amber eyes watering. Marcus took the bottle back and drank from it without flinching. "Builds character." Vira watched him swallow the liquid that had just set fire to her throat, and something shifted in her expression. It was not quite respect. Respect would take longer. It was recognition. an acknowledgement that the creature sitting in front of her was not what she had believed it to be. "How did you know about the vascular cluster?" she asked. Marcus set the bottle down on the table between them. "Your species published the anatomy studies yourselves. They're in the Galactic Forum database. Open access, no restrictions. I read every paper I could find on the trip here. You studied our biology. 3 weeks of reading. Your vascular system, your musculature, your nerve map, your adrenal response patterns, all of it. Your scientists are very thorough." Vira was quiet for a moment. "No one has ever done that before. No one ever needed to. You've been winning so long that your opponents stopped trying to understand you. They just showed up and hoped for the best." He shrugged, then winced as his shoulder reminded him not to shrug. Hope is not a strategy. Another silence settled between them. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had hurt each other badly and were now sitting in the wreckage, taking stock. "My people have a saying," Vira said finally. "Strength is the blade. Endurance is the hand that holds it." She paused. "I had forgotten the second part. I spent so long sharpening the blade that I forgot it was useless without the grip to swing it." Marcus nodded. "We have a saying too. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." Vira blinked. "You compare yourself to a dog. Small, loud, and too stupid to know when to quit. Yeah, that's about right." Something happened then that no living being in the galaxy had ever witnessed. Captain Vira Thalkeen laughed. It was a short, rough sound, like boulders being tumbled in a river, but it was real. And it changed something between them, broke some wall that neither of them had realized was still standing. 3 days later, Marcus Cole boarded a transport ship bound for New Ganymede. The blockade was gone. The Velshari fleet had withdrawn within hours of the Crucible's conclusion, as required by galactic law. The colony was safe. Its 1.2 million residents would never know how close they had come to losing everything. The transport descended through the atmosphere on a clear morning, and when it touched down at the colony's main spaceport, Marcus found something he had not expected. A crowd, thousands of people, gathered along the landing field, waving flags and holding signs. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, cheering and pointing at the ship. News drones buzzed overhead, capturing every angle. Someone had hung a banner across the terminal building that read, "Welcome home, Sergeant Cole." Marcus stood at the top of the boarding ramp, bandaged and bruised, and stared at the crowd with an expression that looked almost like panic. He had faced an 8-foot alien warrior in double gravity without flinching, but 10,000 cheering civilians appeared to terrify him. A reporter pushed through the crowd with a microphone. Sergeant Cole, can you tell us what was going through your mind when Captain Vira activated the gravity amplifier?" Marcus looked at the reporter. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the sky above New Ganymede, blue and clear and full of stars that now belonged, by law and by blood, to the people standing in front of him. "Honestly," he said, "I thought good, now she's fighting in my house." The crowd erupted. Marcus ducked his head and walked down the ramp as quickly as his injured knee would allow, disappearing into the mass of people who wanted to shake his hand, slap his back, and thank him for something he considered to be nothing more than his job. 3 months passed. New Ganymede grew. The blockade became a memory, then a story, then a legend that parents told their children at bedtime. Marcus returned to active duty, declined 2 promotions, and went back to training in high gravity like nothing had happened. The galaxy moved on as galaxies do, but it moved on differently. The human species, once dismissed as soft-skinned newcomers with no natural weapons, no armor and no obvious combat advantages, had been reclassified in the threat assessments of every major galactic power. The new classification varied by species, but the meaning was the same everywhere. Do not underestimate them, do not corner them, and whatever you do, do not make them fight for something they love. Then, on a quiet Tuesday, a deep space monitoring station on the edge of explored territory picked up a transmission. It was not in any known language. It did not match any known species. It was a signal of immense power, broadcast on a frequency that punched through subspace like a fist through paper, and it was getting closer. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within the hour. Representatives from 72 species crowded into the forum chamber, their translators buzzing with fear and confusion. The signal had been analyzed. It was not a message. It was an announcement, the interstellar equivalent of a predator's roar, meant to paralyze prey before the hunt began. The Kralith swarm, a species from beyond the mapped galaxy, referenced only in ancient records and horror stories, world eaters, planet strippers, a civilization that did not conquer, it consumed. The chamber erupted in shouting. Accusations, demands, pleas for alliance, threats of abandonment, chaos pure and familiar. High Counselor Dreth, old and tired and humbled by the lesson his champion had taught him, raised his four arms for silence. When the noise finally faded, he spoke a single sentence that would be quoted in history books for the next 10,000 years. Contact the humans,